بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما والحمد لله رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. First of all, I want to thank people for the response that we had on the website. It's very promising, and I think there's definitely an interest in having these casts, so we are very grateful for people that are really taking the time to listen to what we have to say. Hopefully it'll be beneficial and edifying. It's Monday, July 31st that we're recording this, and this morning's paper that I looked at, I'd just like to put that there for people to think about. So there's a little Lebanese child that looks like a girl who's dead. No crime. On the day when those buried alive will be asked, for what crime were they buried alive? And those people buried under that rubble. I think that is a question, it's a rhetorical question. God's not going to question them because they're sinless. So children buried under rubble it's actually quite shocking, but more shocking to me is the lack of response. What's been deeply troubling, I think, for me, is the fact that there's not an immense sense of outrage. There's not people in very large numbers responding to these things. In fact, today on Google's website, the #1 downloaded story was about a model that died in a car accident. So this is the state of my country. It's people that are in a deep state of heedlessness about what's happening in the world. I was deeply troubled that there was no sense of outrage in this country that this administration immediately dispatched a supply of bombs to the state of Israel instead of being an active agent in trying to create a ceasefire. It was actually fueling the fire. And these are not political statements, by the way. These are moral statements. It's as simple as that. I'm not making any political statements. I'm a citizen of this country. I'm here. And these are things that concern me ethically. That if people are engaged in immoral acts, and there's immoral acts on all sides, so I'm not going to play some kind of melodramatic black and white card here because I'm not interested in melodrama. If you want melodrama, there's plenty of it dished out every day from Hollywood. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in getting to some deeper understanding about what's going on. So in light of this headline, Israel pauses airstrikes after 37 children killed, and that's the official number, which often differs from real numbers. I'd like to read from a book called Jewish Theology by Rabbi Kohler, written in 1918, before Israel was a state, and he was at the Hebrew Union College. It's a very, very extraordinary book, but I just want to read one little section from Jewish theology. Even to dumb beasts, God extends His mercy. This Jewish tenderness is an inheritance from the shepherd life of the patriarchs, who were eager to quench the thirst of the animals in their care before they thought of their own comfort. This sense of sympathy appears in the biblical precepts as to the overburdened beast, the ox treading the corn, and the mother beast or mother bird with her young, as well as the Talmudic rule, first to feed the domestic animals and then sit down to the meal. This has remained a characteristic trait of Judaism. Thus, in connection with the verse of the psalm, His tender mercies are over all His works. It is related of Rabbi Judah, the saint, the redactor of the Mishnah, that he was afflicted with pain for 13 years, and gave as reason that he once struck and kicked away a calf, which had run to him moaning for protection. He was finally relieved after he had taught his household to have pity even on the smallest of creatures. In fact, Rabbi Gamaliel, his grandfather, had taught before him, "Whosoever has compassion on his fellow creatures, on him God will have compassion." So that's from a text on Judaism that tells us about the tenderness of the Jewish religion, and I think that it's really important right now for Muslims, Jews, and Christians to really think about how far we are from our practice, from our traditions, from what they're telling us what we should be doing. Because the problem is not religion, the problem is an absence of religion. That's the problem. It's not religion, it's an absence of religion. Jonathan Swift said, we have just enough religion to hate one another, and we don't have enough to love one another. And that's at the root of this problem. And I think Muslims, we have to return to our tradition and be faithful to it. And we can only call the Jews back to their tradition if we're practicing our tradition, because we're hypocrites when we tell others that they should be practicing what their tradition tells them to do. The Quran says that the Jews have nothing until they apply the Torah. They have nothing. They have no leg to stand on. There's no moral leg to stand on. But the same can apply to the Muslims. The Muslims have nothing until they apply the precepts of the Quran. And the Christians have nothing until they apply the precepts of the gospel. But that's where I see is the root of the problem here, is that we're not practicing our faith. And innocent children are the victims of the stupidity, of the arrogance, of the inability for the adults to solve their problems in a civilized way, in a way that sets aside all of the tribal concerns. But I think Muslims in the United States should call upon Jewish Americans that they need to really think deeply at the abandonment of the State of Israel, of these principles that are rooted in Judaism. In the Proverbs in the Bible, God says, if we believe that it's a revelation from God, the Proverb says, feed your enemy when he's hungry and quench his thirst when he's thirsty. And the Jewish rabbis commenting on that say that in order not that your enemy's hate increases, but perhaps by showing acts of kindness, their hate will diminish. Because that is the goal. The goal of the Abrahamic faith is unity. It's not to separate people, it's to bring people together. And another thing that the rabbis say about this, and I just read this in a text, a Jewish text on Jewish ethics, is that commenting on that, one of the rabbis said that it was very important to always try to win your enemy over to become your friend and not to create a permanent enemy. And I think that's as much, for me, a truth that Muslims need to really internalize as well as the Jewish people. Because we're children of Abraham, and I know that Abraham is not pleased with what's going on. I'm absolutely certain of that. If I'm certain of anything in this world, I am certain that Abraham, whose sons and daughters, the daughters of Isaac, the daughters of Ishmael, whose sons and daughters are suffering because of the inability of political leaders, to actually work towards the betterment of our conditions. So that's my statement about what's going on. I'd like to continue in the content of character, because I truly believe that the crisis today is an ethical crisis. It's a metaphysical crisis. It's not a political crisis. The absence of ethics and metaphysics from politics is what is creating all of this. We don't have political crises. We have ethical crises. We have people that are not living ethical lives. They don't have ethical concerns. Their ends and purposes in their actions are not moral ends and purposes. They're venal. They're based on greed, on covetousness, on pride, on what the Christians used to call the deadly sins. And that's what they do. They cause death and destruction. The sins of pride, the sins of anger, ira, anger. That's one of the 7 deadly sins, is to become angry.